Okay, we're now going to hear reports from our committees from yesterday. Steve Winter.
Is that working again? Great. The Finance and Infrastructure Committee met yesterday. I have some resolutions on the consent agenda that were passed unanimously. I'd like to, with the chair's permission, go through them as a whole and take a vote as a whole. We have designer selections for Davie Hall, Gardner Hall, and Lindbergh Cancer Center elevator repairs, Taylor Hall fire safety improvements. We have property and lease acquisitions for the Auditorium Theater for Carolina Performing Arts at New Carolina Square, lease of office space for Frank Porter Graham Child Development Institute at existing location in Carborough. And I think those are the only things I need a vote on.
Okay, we have a motion coming from committee. Do I have a second? Second. All in favor? Aye. So moved.
We also had some other items on the consent agenda, which included design for the pit sidewalk area and an internal audit report. Is any discussion on those items needed? I'll assume not and move on. We got a financial update from Matt. I think the highlight of it was that although we do not know at this point, the expectation is that in the coming year our state funding will be flat to slightly up because the anticipation is that the university system as a whole will be up. We got a really great report from David Ruth on development. I think the highlight is that cash and commitments for this year are up 51%, which is really amazing. And even if we exclude the gift of $100 million from Fred Eshelman, we are still up 10%. With a growing pipeline, I think the prospects for the future are great. The bulk of the meeting related to facilities. There is an R&R budget. There is a massive need on this campus for repairs. I think our backlog is in excess of $600 million at this point. The ongoing needs that we have, which include some renovations, are in excess of $50 million a year. Some of that we fund ourselves, but historically a large portion of that has been funded by the state. Over the last 5 years, if we look at the average, one of the major hits that we have taken is in state funding for repairs and renovation, which are supposed to occur because we turn the buildings over to the state and they assume risk for both operating costs and repairs. When we get any money at all, that is typically at a rate of about 1/3 where it had been historically. We have buildings we can't use major parts of. We have other buildings that are falling apart. And when we do spend money to fix them, we are fixing them in a bad part of their curve, meaning we end up putting Band-Aids on them rather than really improving them for the future use. It led to a large discussion on alternatives because it's a situation we can't tolerate, especially as we look to the future and changing needs and utilizations, and we look to new buildings. So a couple of solutions that were presented. One was the state-issued debt, which for us is the best solution, though is the one in least of our control. The second is we issue bonds. We have some bond capacity available, but that would limit our future borrowing. And the last idea was to issue century bonds, which are bonds. They have longer duration. They're interest only, for some period of time, 35, 50, or 100 years, which may look to give us greater flexibility. I think it was a feeling of the committee that it is worthwhile for the administration to explore these measures. Finally, it was my last meeting as chair. I've really been honored to chair this committee. I want to thank the current members of the board, especially the members of the Finance and Infrastructure Committee. I also want to thank our primary contacts in the administration who actually do the work: Matt, Chris, David, Phyllis, and Bubba. It's really been an honor to work with you. We've been through a lot. We've done a lot. We've taken on things that other groups have not taken on, and we've, I think, thought about things in ways that hadn't been thought about. I will miss it. I leave with a sense of accomplishment. As I said yesterday, and I'll repeat today, the one thing I feel comfortable with is I leave this place in a better place than I found it. And I think we should all try for that in whatever we do. So, once again, thank you for the opportunity. It's been an honor, and I will forever be proud of this university. Thanks.
Steve, thank you for your report, and thank you for your leadership. I'll now call on Don Curtis for External Relations.
Mr. Chairman, the majority of our meeting was devoted to a report from our chief of our campus police, along with the chief of the Chapel Hill Police Department, on how extensively they work together and how they coordinate, and it was a very rewarding to hear how well they work together, because, as you know, the town of Chapel Hill and the campus Carver are so tightly tied together that where one begins, the other ends, and vice versa. So it's important that they work together, and they emphasized over and over in that report how well they work together. We also heard a update from Vice Chancellor on communications, and also, of course, as Steve has just reported, our Vice Chancellor for Development gave us a great report as well. And we also were updated on our concerns of what's happening in the legislature. That too was a good report, and of course that's a program that's still in action. I think that's pretty much the summary. You told me to keep it short.
I did.
I always do what I always do what you tell me to.
I don't know. I told you 7:30 this morning. You didn't believe my 7:30.
Actually, I got here at 7. I went uptown to get some breakfast, and I got back late.
Thank you, Don. And again, thank you for your leadership on external affairs for the last 2 years. I'd like to now call on Phil Clay for Innovation and Impact.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Our committee has no actions. We did a number of things basically on two lines. One is to get a briefing on the new agreement with GlaxoSmithKline. We are all very excited about the arrangement for a variety of reasons, the least of which is, well, I shouldn't say the least of which, but far more than the money involved, the beginning of a journey of engaging corporations at a very high level on research items of major interest to the university. We understand that this is a very long-term agreement, that there is an opportunity for expansion and engagement of other parties. There are very good arrangements for all of the questions we had about faculty involvement, intellectual property arrangements, rules for governance and expansion. All of those things seem to have been very well handled by the the university management, and we're very delighted that this happened and that it's the beginning of something that can be quite big. We also received a introduction to a new member of Carol Cohn's team, Brian. I didn't write his last name. What's Brian's last name? Moore, Bryant Moore, who comes to Chapel Hill in support of our connection, our development of university industry partnerships. He is an alumnus of our chemistry department, has a long career in history and engagement with university and industry, laid out a very exciting personal history, and if we could be just one more stop on his very exciting life's journey, we will have been well served. Judith, we also acknowledged Judith becoming a permanent vice chair. I think she was an interim vice chair at our last meeting. The build out of her team and our confidence that what started out, I had in my notes that it started out with Holden's initiative probably 7 to 10 years ago, but actually she reminded us that it goes way back, even back into the mid-'80s. So we believe that the university is on a very good path toward a innovation and impact agenda that will serve the university very well. In ending, want to thank Chairman Caudle for appointing the committee. I think it was a very good move. It allowed us to shine a light on something that would have happened to some degree anyway, but I think we put a light on a set of activities that will expand. I also want to thank Barbara, Judith, Jim, and others who have over the last couple of years been a major source of support and assistance to the committee, as well as others who have come from various parts of the university. So with that, we adjourned. Thank you.
Phil, thank you. Thank you for your leadership. This committee was a new committee 2 years ago, and Phil, you took this committee to places beyond what we had hoped, so thank you so much.
Mr. Chairman, I failed to mention that we will have some activity in closed session as a part of our report later on naming and special recognitions.
Great. Thank you. Okay, we have a motion from committee. Do you have a second? All in favor?
Aye.
So moved.
And that's my report on the open session. We'll have a few items in closed session.
Thank you, Austin. And again, thank you for your leadership. Last 4 years.
Actually,
Or was it longer? Six?
but
Predates me.
I'm really excited that future trustees will be taking over this duty.
Well, thank you so much for what you've done. You've done a fabulous job with University Affairs. It's a tremendous job. Okay, we'll now hear a report from Sally Shuping-Russell. Sally has chaired the Enterprise Risk Management Task Force. It's a task force we created 2 years ago because we wanted to look at risk associated with our university and how we're handling it. Risk associated with what you do. There's risk associated with what you don't do. And so Sally led the task force, consisted of trustees and university administration, and we thought we could do it in a year. Turned out we needed to, and so we're going to hear the report this morning. Sally?
Larry, thanks very much. The printed copy of this report is still at the printers, and so we're presenting this in some detail, more so than I might have otherwise. The actual report will be mailed to you separately when it's available. So at the beginning, I just want to say that the university, one of the things that we wanted to do was to make sure that this university, which has already been around for 220 years, is around for another 220 years, and that we're fulfilling the mission that was put forth in 1789 and is over up here. Again, I think it was presented earlier, and I think in Austin's report, but the notion that it is part of the duty of the state of North Carolina to fulfill the happiness and duties of just making life better for the entire state, and to do that through an educational system and a university system. And I think that one of the things we did was to try to kind of constantly make sure how we can make sure that university can stay consistent with its mission over time. And so to do that, let me just, this was appointed back in July, as Larry said, about 2 years ago. It is a trustee-led process, which I think is very important, because we really are trying to look at the institutional risks. It did take more than 18 months of study to get here, and it's almost 2 years at this point by getting the report done. I want to quickly just put up here the names of members of the task force, and for those of you that are here, if you'd stand, just so people could see who you are. I know that Laurie Burrows is here, who is the staff. I can see y'all don't want to stand up, but I'll just make note that many people who are on this are here, and it was quite an exclusive group, and everyone worked very, very hard, and I thank them for that. So the charge of the committee was to identify the risks or potential risks to the university, and make clear here, did not mean that these risks were necessarily not being taken care of. What we were doing was trying to say, these are the risks you need to take care of. Quite frankly, most of them are being taken care of, but it's important to realize that as we present this report, because we are presenting risks, and a lot of those are taken care of, but we're saying these are the ones you need to make sure you are taken care of, and that's the way this is presented. We want to also identify opportunities for Carolina, and then create a sustainable way for the university to move forward, safeguarding the academic quality and institutional integrity. So as I said, we looked at risks across the university. There were probably about 15 categories we fell into initially. We whittled it down to 6: strategic, reputational, financial, operational, safety, and regulatory. And then we created 3 subcommittees to evaluate these, and I'm going to present the findings of these subcommittees in a minute. Excuse me. The other thing we did was look at each risk by the probability of occurring and the impact of occurring if it did occur, and then its likely timing. And this matrix, which you can't see as clear here as I'd like, but it basically shows low probability, high impact, or high probability, low impact, or high probability, high impact. And then over the, if you will, the block swing back, or things that are ongoing risks or risks that are likely to occur within a year, then risks that are likely to occur in a more moderate time period, 1 to 3 years, and then risks that are likely to occur in a longer term fashion. And we looked at all of those, which was quite complex, and in the report's appendices we've broken out those, all of those, but the report itself we decided to focus on the high impact, high probability risks that face the institution, because that was really the key importance. So the task force findings. First of all, across every subcommittee came the notion of the culture of trust. And this is something that's needed across the university. It almost sounds trite, but I think that there was a feeling that externalities, and both internal and external events over the last couple of years, have really challenged the notion of trust within the university and across the university. And this doesn't mean that there isn't, that it's embedded, it's more than just the perception in a lot of ways, but just to say that this really, we need to pay attention to, that people do feel like Carolina's a place that they can trust what's going on. Part of that is prioritizing frequent, full, and timely communication across the university and its constituents. Also, the need to de-silo areas of the campus so that there's a consistent culture of trust and accountability. And accountability here is important because there's a feeling that if people don't know that they're accountable for things, that they may not fulfill them as they should. And the task force felt that in several areas within the campus that the notion of being accountable for what you were doing was going to be important to emphasize. A couple of big picture themes came across. One was that we need an institutional strategic plan so that everyone's pulling in the same direction. Secondly, we need an organizational review that's top to bottom, but also bottom to top in order to make sure we have an optimal structure and communications method. And then finally, a comprehensive review of safety and compliance. And this is because these areas were so complex and heterogeneous that the task force felt limited in its capability to fully assess whether we were adequately mitigating it. From our point of view, we thought we were, but again, since we weren't all lawyers and specialists in these areas, there's a feeling that the administration may need to take a deeper dive to really have a sense of the risk tolerance there. We did set forth 2 guiding principles, and I think that these were to serve as, if you will, the lodestar for the university to show the way to move forward so that we can be here another 220 years fulfilling the mission. And one of the statements that's in the task force report I wanted to put up here and read, and that is that within the university, academic freedom, unencumbered inquiry, and creation of wholly new concepts are required to advance knowledge and teach independent thinking by students. Again, just the notion of education and discovery is a very key part of what we're trying to do here, and we have to have an environment to make that possible. Secondly, I've put up here just the current university mission statement, and that is to serve the people of North Carolina, the United States, and the world, again, through teaching, research, and public service, and embracing an unwavering commitment to excellence as part of one of the world's great research institutions. So this is the framework within which this task force worked, and worked very hard, I'll have to say. All right, and now, so we broke these findings into strategic and reputational risks, financial and operating risks, and safety and regulatory risks. These were the 3 subcommittees. So the strategic and reputational risks, again, a lot of these are being taken care of, but just the risks we need to make sure that we're covering as an institution in order to protect strategic and also the reputation. One is, again, maintaining a culture of integrity, protect academic freedom, recruiting the top faculty, staff, and students, and attracting the best young faculty. And these 2 go together in an interesting way because we talk a lot about retaining our faculty, but the task force felt that it was also very important that we recruit and refresh the faculty. And one thing that's happened over the last couple of years with the budget cuts is that positions, when they were vacated, were eliminated. And a lot of those positions were actually entry-level positions where, new faculty members could come in or graduate students could come in. And so to some extent, there's a worry that those entry positions may not be as available as they should be, and that we need to make sure that we are bringing in young faculty, great graduate students, as well as letting our existing faculty that are doing excellent work maintain and retain them. I do think that part of the program the medical center has just put in place with early retirement might help with this, but just to sort of emphasize that for a minute. Align the layers of governance, and this is something we're all very familiar with, but Carolina, as you know, has got about 6 layers of governance. You have the Board of Trustees, the administration, the faculty, and then you've got general administration, the Board of Governors, and the legislature, and we need to work to make sure all of these are in alignment as best as we can. Again, overseeing the balance between athletics and academics, and given that we want to be strong in both of these and have the top talented people who are strong together in these, we need to focus on that as well as we are doing. We need to provide needed transparency and also be ever mindful of the public perceptions as much as the reality. And I think all of us are aware of this, but again, we wanted to just make sure these went in as risks that needed to be maintained over time. The mitigation measures that are in place, I think everyone felt that this year especially, the trustees, the administrators, students, faculty we're all working with the Board of Governors and the legislature to try to make sure that, the budgets and the programs were protected as much as they could be. So, again, a very big sense of the aligning of interests is we're working to keep that going. We're doing what we can do there. Developing new ways to monitor strategic issues. A lot of programs have been put in place. I just put 3 of them up here for the sake of time. Winston could give us a fuller list, but there have been several task forces put in place to help with these big issues. We feel like we did respond urgently and timely to the accrediting agencies, BOG, and other compliance offices when they came about. Rules have been created to ensure that faculty chairs have reviewed every 5 years. That was, again, a very strong mitigating measure. Likewise, improving course monitoring activities. And then finally, we really think that we have succeeded in attracting more funding for research, both on the federal level and also on the corporate level, even though we need to increase that. Obviously, the GSK program and others, this is working forward, and so we are moving in that direction. So recommendations in this would be, again, the strategic plan is key. Faculty leadership, as I mentioned. The second and third bullets on there, again, work together because there's a sense that the faculty often go from being, professors into being administrators in a way when they move into deans, et cetera, and that there may be a need to help train them and to some extent or prepare for that transition as that occurs, so that when faculty do step into those positions, they have some administrative skills that would be helpful. I think the others are pretty clear: prioritizing recruitment, collaborating across the UNC system. Again, I think we're doing that well. Continue to focus on academics and athletic excellence. And then the last one is to foster dialogue and increase the conversation about education as a job creator and economic driver. Now, this is not only in terms of today's jobs, but it's also, and I think for Carolina in particular, the task force felt that the emphasis on tomorrow's jobs. And so this was one of the recommendations coming out of the strategy. Looking at the financial and operational risks, these really are intertwined. It's hard to unencumber them, and therefore a risk in one area will affect the risk in the other, and you really can get a multiplier effect if these are not handled correctly. There are 2 factors that created a lot of vulnerabilities for Carolina here. The first one is that the administrative units took the brunt of the budget cuts over the last 5 years, which were almost $200 million of recurring revenues. And I will say that this was partly when I was chairing the Finance Committee, that the state auditor, actually almost put in the university's audit that our financial oversight unit had been cut too much. And we were able to convince her that that wasn't the case, but that's the degree to which that unit was cut. And I think that we just need to be aware that it created some vulnerabilities, which I think we've taken care of. Secondly, continuous process improvement has not really been part of Carolina's operating focus. There's been a little bit of if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And, and this has led to some systems being out of date, which perhaps should not be out of date if we had that more in place. So if you look again at the risks we need to make sure that we cover, we need to make sure that we have a financial planning process that's ongoing and in place, because if it's misaligned, if it's insufficient, it's going to misalign the resource allocation and institutional objectives. And as much work as Carol and her staff are putting in to really articulate opportunities and go for them and have major big goals, it's very important that the financial structure be in place to back that up fully. Again, this is not to say that it's not, it's just to say how important that is. The IT area can be too decentralized and then be insufficient or inefficient, and this is something one needs to always be aware of. Likewise, organizational structure, as I just mentioned, it needs to be structured so that you can optimize it in getting rid of inefficiencies, especially in this time of the tight budgets. One of the things, in the past, there sometimes has been a sense of focusing on historic allocations when setting budgets. And really the need now is to make sure that that isn't the way budgets are done, that they really are looking more for anticipated future needs, and this making sure that that's done as a risk. Inadequate disaster recovery and business continuity plans. This is actually a very significant area, and it's one that we do need to cover more, and I'll get to that in a minute. And insufficient endowment resources or flexible endowment resources creates a risk, and I think we all know that this is a continuing risk we have, and the task force wanted to make it was very important that this is a risk that is present now and one we need to always be aware of and try to eliminate as best we can. Again, mitigation measures in place. The first two items here really sort of take care of the notion of there's, a central financial planning process is not in place right now, but through tactical plans and the Financial Council, we feel like, this is being taken care of. So the things that you would expect a larger process to take place is being taken place in pieces, but putting a larger process in place would be good. PeopleSoft and Epic have been implemented, which are going to be significant, as you know, operations to get technology advances across the institution. The development office investment in that, we've done a significant amount. David's done a great job. We all know that's going to need to improve. I'm not going to sit here and read these. You can read them yourselves. I do want to make the fourth bullet from the bottom, reallocation of funds to support salaries and faculty retention. This is, I think, great kudos goes to the administration and academic leadership for going through and being able to cull resources and reallocate resources in order to make some, to respond to retention needs and create some faculty support and salary increases where we needed to. We were much more successful in retaining our faculty this year over the last couple of years, so hopefully I just wanted to sort of point out a kudos there for the work that's been done. And then I think there have been many IT improvements, and especially in centralizing it, but also just across the board. And just to give you an example of the IT improvements, this is how we did student IDs in 1976, and this is how they are now in 2006. And I just want you to know this is my original hair color, and and at that point, student IDs had your social security number on them, so I had to black out for you. Anyway, so there have been great. When I put this out, someone said, "What are there holes in that card for?" And I had to explain that it was a punch card, which I'd never heard of before. So anyway, I just thought I'd let y'all know how we have made such advancements. And Chris, thank you very much if you're over there. So the recommendations, again, to begin a major capital campaign as soon as possible. And this was a very, very high recommendation from the task force. And in part of that is to increase unrestricted endowment, develop a regular comprehensive financial planning process, develop a sufficient disaster recovery plan, and then the optimal organizational structure, which we already discussed. Looking at safety and regulatory risks, the great thing about having a lot more grant support has been that we have more money, but it also means we have a lot more compliance and regulatory needs across the campus. And so that is just kind of comes along with that process, but it also has really made our regulatory and compliance offices, expand greatly. Safety concerns are always with us, and this is a growing, obviously, with the notion of alcohol use, sexual assault, recent, loss of life within our community, have made this the highest risk we face today, and I'm not telling you anything you don't already know on that. The summary of the safety and regulatory risks, we divided them into 4 areas: research-related regulations, non-research-related regulations, and those were related mainly to student activities, EEO accreditation, NCAA. Compliance-driven, again, those were much more applied to the research area, and then the day-to-day safety concerns. And one of the pieces of this, a lot of this is made of getting information across correctly and properly. And this piece in italics here tries to capture that. But a lot of times we will have the regulation or policy in place, but people are not aware of it, either because they just don't read the policy manuals, or they've been here a long time and they think that they know something and they aren't aware that it's been changed and they don't keep up with the rules. So actually making sure that this information is actually read. It's in a language that people will understand, and I think when we looked at our sexual assault policies back a year or two ago and realized the sort of legality of the language initially, and then transposed it into much more of a language that was more students could understand and the average non-lawyer person could understand, as an example of that. So these are the regulatory risks that we reviewed, and for these, I think the mitigation measures here we felt comfortable with, but again, these are areas with great legal complexities, and the task force did not feel like we really were capable to give you saying these risks are all covered. As far as we felt, David and his crew were doing a very good job on this, but I wanted to just also list just the extensiveness of these regulatory concerns that the university faces. Safety risks reviewed. The first two, again, pertain to more of the research area. The last ones are much more personal. The third bullet point there I want to just cite, because this was one I don't think we would have thought of as much before, international operations. And as you know, we have many students and faculty studying overseas or working overseas. And heretofore, we kind of focused on making sure their languages are right, they've got the ability to meet with the culture, get the research done. But this past year, the Ebola crisis made us realize that we really had to make sure we knew how to get people out of regions fast if something happened. And obviously, with the Ebola situation, that did happen. So one of the safety risks that the task force identified, which I think we need to make sure we do adhere to, is the need within the international students and faculty to not only make sure they're fitting in with the culture where they are, but also that if the need arises, that we know how to get them out of there fast so that we can protect their own safety. So the mitigation measures in place, I won't go into every one of these, but essentially we do have policies in place. We have increased the staff a lot. We've done a lot of training. We have put additional software in place, the websites that we have, and we really have worked to increase transparency in this area. I think the task force felt like what we have done has been very good and adequate, because we do agree and, again, validate the notion that we have to balance confidentiality and privacy requirements with the transparency needs. So the recommendations, again, would be to basically put a bigger review in this than we could do. What we can say is wider communications and education are needed. We have to be nimble and smart when communicating this and tailoring the message. But again, the task force's big recommendation here would be to look at this more fully. And then the opportunities for modern Carolina. This was kind of more fun to focus on. And this is just one slide, but the opportunities that we really have to seize, and Larry, you don't ask for 3, but we thought we'd give you 6, but to grow and diversify our research enterprise. And we all know this, but we wanted to make sure it was in the report. And we currently have over $1 billion, and we really want to reach a $2 billion level at this university if we can. And we need to put in place the faculty, the infrastructure, and the financial supports that can make that happen. And this is an opportunity that we are so poised to take advantage of. And the task force felt like it really was one that we had to seize. It also supports so many people across the state and within the university that it's very much a part of fulfilling our mission. Again, continuing innovation and entrepreneurship. Carolina is a leader in this. We're being recognized as a leader in this, and we need to make sure that we continue to have that. The dynamic capital campaign, and I would almost say an audacious capital campaign needs to be put in place. I just thought I'd, get you going over there, and whatever. It just and I know we're working on that, but just we really missed a campaign with Holden stepping down at 4 years, and so because normally we probably would have been sort of in the middle of one right now, but because of that we sort of almost missed a period to have that, which makes the need for this even better. And as Phil pointed out, the money's out there, and if we don't go grab it, somebody else will. Evaluate the global operations. And this is an area we thought had some really interesting opportunities because, as you know, Duke, for example, has got its medical school in Singapore. We had started to put a business school in Qatar back in 2002, and we're all ready to open that. It was under Chancellor Meeser. And with the events of 2011 and all of the discomfort with what was going on in the Middle East at that time, we decided to pull that. But to reinvigorate that idea, are there places where Carolina should think about operations outside the U.S. or schools outside the U.S., really with some feet on the ground, not just online? The next one of expanding the medical faculty, this comes a little bit more home. Across the state, the things we, recently moving faculty into Wilmington, what we're doing in Charlotte, Asheville, as well as Chapel Hill, we think these are great ways that we're serving the state, and we need to, the degree that it's appropriate and agreed upon, it's a real opportunity that we can serve the state as well as serve the university. And then continue to lead and collaborate across the UNC system. And the task force felt very strongly that we have been around for 221 years, and we have the history and the experience to lead the system, and we should lead it, and we are leading it, but we need to make sure we continue to do that because we also need to collaborate across the system. And so sometimes in order to collaborate, you have to step back a little bit and let others show, and we'll need to do that as well. But in doing that, we need to do it under the auspices of leading. And I think those of us that have worked in a lot of organizations know that a lot of times in order to lead, you have to let other people come forward a bit. So collaboration is going to be very important. So quickly, recommendations. Again, maintaining the culture of trust across the university is going to be key. Strategic plan, capital campaign, safety, all very important. Communications that are timely and full and across campus, because a lot of it, we may think of communications only as external communications out of the chancellor's office, but it's really a matter of communications within the units as well, within the divisions of the academic program. Put measurable performance goals in place. Again, this is accountability. The case for centralization and shared services, that's being looked at now. There probably is a place for more shared services, and to continue to look at that. The regulatory repository gets to the notion of people knowing where to find regulations. We do think the last two work together, really, that ultimately we need a chief risk manager officer, and this should be someone that is a high enough level of the institution that reports to a senior person in the institution. In the meantime, we wanted to recommend creating a risk committee of some time to follow up on this work, the task force's work, to sort of have it regularly follow up rather than just have this as intermittent things during time. So just to conclude, the task force felt again, Carolina remains committed to serving North Carolina, and that's key. We always have to keep that in mind, but we also need to keep in mind that we do stand at the top of the world's research universities. We do feel that we have sufficient controls in place for most current and foreseeable risks that would challenge the ability for us to maintain that mission. However, in disaster recovery, business continuity planning, organizational structure need to be mitigated a little bit more, that there are some risks there that need to be attended to. We always have to be aware of supporting a culture of trust. That's just going to sort of be an ongoing process. And lastly, we need to continue to evolve over the next 221 years. We talk about risk as if it's a bad thing, and risk is actually a good and exciting thing, and you really shouldn't shy away from it. In order to be a great institution, we have to take on risk, and but the deal is to control the risk that you take on. And so we wanted to just, in closing, note that to push forward for the next 220 plus years, we want to take on risk. We need to just make sure that we have the things in place to mitigate it. We're comfortable that we're doing right things now. There are some places to fix, as I said, but we, in this whole process, not to look at risk as a bad thing, but look at it as something that we embrace and will control and that will lead us forward. And I'm happy to entertain questions, but I'll also say Peter and Steve and Phil and Kelly, I think, is that it for the 6 trustee members? Did I miss anybody? Were you on it? Okay. I know I got you. Okay. I'll be happy to answer any questions as well.
This is great.
Well, June 30th, I'm stepping off the board, so it's not going to be my responsibility. It's in your hands. No, I think the full report gives a little bit more detail on how to do that, but I think the first step would be sort of a risk committee and looking towards this. At the last two, but then, but I also think, Hayward, that if we, the board keeps these sort of in their head, these major risks, and so when we're looking at things, just make sure that is that triggering something, and I know that Matt, you're working on this chief risk officer, right? Okay, many of people are working. I think that would be right, and the thinking was that this needs to be someone at a very high level who probably has a dotted line responsibility, and the chancellor did not want to full, because she's got plenty of stuff on her plate and doesn't need to have to oversee this person directly. But it needs to be, at a very, very senior level to monitor these things, because they can creep up.
I think the one thing we have to keep in mind, we had 6 trustees on this committee, and Kelly is the only trustee returning that was on the committee. So this board has a challenge to embrace this and make sure that it moves forward. And I think we're going to have to really think about that. And Dwight, that's going to be a real challenge. There's some wonderful stuff. The presentation is fantastic, and I've had a chance to preview a draft of the report. And it's some outstanding work and great ideas and things that are very, very important for our university going forward. And so we're going to have to think about, the next board is going to have to think about how to take this, how to move it forward, how to institutionalize it. And then, also there's some cultural things that we're going to have to change so that the culture embraces this as well, and it becomes just a matter of how we conduct business at Carolina. So that's doable, but I think we need to recognize that the trustee folks that were on this committee, we have Kelly, we have the senior administration folks that were on this committee. They'll be here, but that will be a challenge for this board.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, I was just going to weigh in on that, too. I mean, this is a wonderful report. I think it's a fantastic synthesis, and I remember when you were first talking about doing it, Sally, one of the hardest parts was trying to figure out how do you get your arms around something that's trying to touch every single thing at the institution. So do remember, we have a very active institution that actually runs all of these things. And yet, you wanted to be able to stand up at the 20,000-foot level and say, what are the areas that we need to take a deeper dive to make sure we're really doing it, not necessarily try to describe the actual action plan for every area at the institution. And I think you managed to do that beautifully well, and I wouldn't have thought at the beginning that was going to be possible. So what I think one of the other things that all of us in these leadership positions, we can take this report too, and in part, people have been working on it, but come back to the board and say, look, these are already being undertaken in these ways, and we're going to look for the ones that are not being undertaken, first of all. Where are we not doing it that we've already revealed? Then secondly, I think we can say, where are we doing it, but we could do a better job synthesizing it and bringing forward. So we need to take some time to offer our own suggestions to you for how it's being implemented and where we need to put the most immediate attention. But without this 20,000-foot view that is so comprehensive, it would have been much more difficult to do that. So I think that also can help as you decide how the next committee wants to take it forward. And I appreciate it. Plus, I can tell how much work went in to get so much distilled into such clear
that's the reason it took 2 years as opposed to 1. But
we're a multi-billion-dollar operation. There's a lot to talk about.
Thank you. I just wanted to put this up here because, I have the honor to be standing here to present this, but these are the people who really did most of the work. Phil was great, Peter and Kelly, Steve. Andrew's left, but he was, was very vocal when he was on, student body president. Jim Dean was, everyone on that list, Matt, Chris, Bill, David, every one of these people put a lot of time into this. And as you can see, they are people who have a heck of a lot of time, other responsibilities. So I'm very proud of the work they've done. I'm proud of this report, and I hope that it will be helpful to you in moving forward. And
Sally, I want to perhaps offer a little broader perspective. 3 years ago, Trustee Lerner and I had a pleasure of visiting 15 or so of our peer institutions and had one-on-one conversations with 20 institutions, 12 face-to-face interviews with presidents of Florida, Georgia Tech, Cal Berkeley, et cetera. And risk management was in the top 3 objectives of every one of those CEOs, every one of those presidents. And when we would follow up on that statement, every one of them said that they were very concerned that they really weren't addressing the issue. And I will tell you, of all the ones we talked to 3 years ago, nobody approached it on a comprehensive level like this. So great job. Now, the devil's in the details, of course, but yeah.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all. And
Can I
again,
just,
thank-
can I add a couple of other comments? In all candor, this would not have happened without Sally. I mean, she rallied the troops consistently throughout. I don't know how many drafts of the report they went through, but my email was cluttered with many, many, many of them as they kept refining and distilling and so forth. All of us, particularly those of us who are in the private sector, know the importance of a assessment and understanding of risk and the management of risk going forward. We also know the practicalities of execution are incredibly difficult. And risk has to literally be imbued in leaders so that they understand they have responsibility within their specific areas to understand risk, know how to mitigate risk, and know how to communicate about risk, because communication is critically important. The end result of all this, I think, if we are lucky enough to be partially successful in implementing a plan like this, is to honestly take some of the burden of responsibility off your shoulders and free you and the senior team up to think about some of the longer-term strategic issues that we have to deal with as a public institution. But it is that step from 20,000 feet to integration and execution by the team on the ground to understanding of risk and when they need to notify you about risk-related issues that's going to enable us to do that. And so I would just suggest to Dwight, in his position of leadership going forward with you, Carol, that you figure out how to take this to the next step, because I think in the end, the university community is going to be a tremendous beneficiary of a really thoughtful risk, enterprise risk management system, and I felt that way since you and I talked about it 2 or 2.5 years ago.
And just, Peter, thank you for your comment. And just to go on top of that, this is a report to the Board of Trustees. It's not a report to the administration. And I think and half the board was on this task force. And I think this is important because this is a responsibility of the board and, and to the administration, but it is not a, Carol, this is what you need to do. This is a board, this is what we need to do and follow over time. So I just wanted to emphasize that and augmenting off of Peter's comments. So,
Sally,
yeah.
and this is really to Peter. I've had some wonderful conversations with Peter over the last few years, and it was a couple summers ago, just before I became chair, and we were talking on the phone, and Peter goes, okay, what are our goals and objectives going to be? We only meet 6 times a year. There's only so much we can do. How are we going to focus, and what are we going to focus on? And we talked about some things, and you talked about enterprise risk management and how important that was for the university and for all the obvious reasons. And yet we really were not doing that at Carolina in a systematic way, in an institutionalized way. And so that's what helped lead to us creating the task force, and then for it becoming one of our objectives this year is to bring it forward and implement and go forward. So this board, one of the beauties of this board over the last 2 years, we haven't worked on things that didn't move Carolina forward. We've made a point at focusing on our goals and objectives and making sure that everything that we were doing was actually propelling the university forward. We didn't work on things that had no real value, and we have limited time. We are a governing board. So we need to think very thoughtfully about how and what we work on. And this board worked on things that were important for the university. This was one. And so it's awfully, awfully important that we take this and move forward going forward. So, Dwight, again, the challenge is going to be how do we do that?
Thank you all, yeah, thank you all.
Thank you, Sally, and thank you, everyone that was involved with this.